On the morning of my 70th birthday, I made myself a pot of coffee the way my late wife used to. 2 scoops of dark roast from that little place on Bloor Street, a pinch of cinnamon in the grounds, water just off the boil. I stood at the kitchen window of our house in Forest Hill and watched the maples in the backyard turning the color of rust and embers. 42 years we lived in that house. She'd been gone for 11 of them, and the boy we raised in those rooms upstairs, the boy whose first steps I caught on a Polaroid by the fireplace, sent me a text that afternoon that ended up costing him and his wife their place in a $36 million family trust. 2 sentences. That's all it took, and his wife tapped a little heart on it like she was applauding a clever post on Instagram. If you believe family is built on respect and not on a checkbook, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd like to know how far this story carries. Because what I'm about to tell you, I lived through. Every cold minute of it. Let me back up. I built my company from a single workshop in Mississauga in 1978. Industrial fasteners. Not glamorous, I know. Nobody throws a parade for the man who makes the bolts that hold the bridges together. But I did all right. By the time I was 50, I had 3 plants, contracts with 2 of the big aerospace firms in Montreal, and a name that meant something in the trade. My wife, who I'll just call her by her name when it matters, but for now, I'll call her my wife because saying her name still does something to me. She ran the books for the first 15 years. We did it together. And when our son came along late, when she was 39 and I was 44, we agreed he'd never want for anything. That was the promise. That was the mistake. The morning of my 70th, I waited. I'm not too proud to say that. I sat in the sunroom and I waited for the phone to ring. My son lives in Yorkville, downtown Toronto, with his wife of 9 years. They have no children. Their dog has its own Instagram account. He's a partner at a boutique consulting firm that I largely funded the launch of, though if you asked him about it at a dinner party, he described himself as a self-made entrepreneur. His wife runs what she calls a curated lifestyle brand, which as far as I can tell means she takes photographs of her own kitchen and sells things to women who want to look like her. By 11 that morning, nothing. By 2, nothing. The cleaning lady came and went. I told her, "Happy birthday" to me, and she gave me a hug and brought me a butter tart from her sister's bakery in Etobicoke. That butter tart was the kindest thing anyone did for me that day. By 4 o'clock, the silence had a weight to it, like a wet wool coat draped over your shoulders. I picked up the phone 3 or 4 times and put it down again. I told myself, he's busy. They're both busy. Don't be that father. Don't be the one who needs reassurance from his own kid, like a child needing a nightlight. But I was that father. I'd become him without noticing, so I typed out a message. Nothing dramatic. I wrote, "Just thinking of you both today. Hope the week is treating you well. Love, Dad." I read it 3 times. Deleted the word love once. Put it back in. Hit send. The reply came in under 2 minutes. 2 sentences. "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all." I read it once. I read it again. I read it a 3rd time, slower, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less surgical. They did not. The thing about a message like that is, it doesn't read like the words of a son who's tired or stressed or having a bad week. It reads like something a human resources department in a Calgary head office sends out before a quarterly layoff. There was no heat in it, no grief, just a clean, dismissive period at the end of a sentence that had been 35 years in the making. And then I saw it. The little red heart icon. Liked by my daughter-in-law. That heart did something to me that the message hadn't quite managed. It turned a private wound into a public one. She'd seen the message. She'd read it. And she'd reached over and tapped a heart on it like she was congratulating him on a witty tweet. The 2 of them, sitting wherever they were, in their condo with the floor-to-ceiling view of Lake Ontario that I had paid the down payment on, applauding each other for cutting their father out of their lives by text message. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you about that. I've cried over my wife. I've cried over my dog when we put him down in 2009. I did not cry over that text. What I felt was something colder and slower. It was the way you feel when you finally accept that the leak in the basement isn't going to fix itself. That you've been mopping for 10 years instead of calling the plumber. And now the foundation itself might be rotted through. I sat in the sunroom for a long time. I watched the light change on the maples, and I started to make a list in my head, not of grievances exactly, but of moments. The condo down payment. $350,000. No questions asked. The wedding at the Ritz-Carlton. $220,000. Her last business idea. The one before the lifestyle brand. An artisanal candle subscription that ran for 6 months. $80,000. The Audi. A gift for her 30th. $65,000 on top. The monthly transfers that started after he quit his second real job in 2017. $20,000 a month. Every month, like clockwork, to a joint account. I'd never made him ask twice. I'd never made him explain a single charge. And the last time he and I sat down for what he called a financial conversation, 2 summers ago at the cottage in Muskoka, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Dad, you have to understand, this is family money. It's all going to come to me anyway. Why are we even talking about this?" I'd let it go. I'd refilled his glass. I told myself he was tired. I picked up the phone and I scrolled to his name in my contacts and I pressed block this caller. The little screen asked me if I was sure. I pressed yes. Then I did the same for hers. The phone went quiet in my hand. It felt lighter somehow, like I'd set down a suitcase I hadn't realized I was carrying up the stairs. Then I called my lawyer. His name doesn't matter for the story, but he and I have known each other since 1991. He was the one who set up the family trust after my wife passed. He picked up on the second ring. I told him, briefly, what had happened. I didn't editorialize. I just gave him the facts the way I would have given them to an accountant. The text. The heart. The phone call I was now making. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been waiting for this call for about 8 years. Are you free tomorrow morning?" I was free. His office was in one of those glass towers on Bay Street. The ones that looked like ice cubes stood on end. I drove down through the snow that had started overnight, the first real dusting of the season, and I sat in his corner office while he laid out the structure of the trust I had largely forgotten the details of. The trust held the house in Forest Hill. It held the cottage in Muskoka. It held the title to my son's condo in Yorkville, which he believed he owned, but which, on paper, was leased to him by the trust at a nominal rate of $1 a year. It held the lease on his wife's Audi. It held the line of credit that backed both of their credit cards, and it processed the monthly transfers, $20,000 on the first of every month, automatically, from a managed portfolio that, last my lawyer checked, was sitting at 36 million Canadian. I am the sole trustee, he reminded me. I am the grantor, the trustee, and until I die, the only person with authority to amend a single line of it. He used the phrase revocable. Trust the way a doctor uses the word benign. It is, he said, a steel safe. You filled it, you hold the key. You can take everything out tomorrow morning and put my mother-in-law's recipe for tourzière inside instead, if that's what you want. I told him what I wanted. I wanted my son and his wife removed as beneficiaries entirely. I wanted the lease on the condo terminated effective the end of the month. I wanted the Audi lease canceled. I wanted the credit lines frozen. I wanted the monthly transfers stopped. I wanted every trace of my financial signature pulled out of their lives by the roots, and I wanted it done before the weekend. He didn't argue. He didn't try to talk me down. He just opened a fresh notepad and started writing. Then he asked, "And the assets themselves?" I hadn't thought about that part yet. I told him I'd let him know in a few days. I drove home through the snow, and I made myself a grilled cheese for dinner. And I watched the Leafs game with the sound off. I slept the way a man sleeps when he's finally put down the suitcase. While I was sleeping, the gears were turning. I wasn't there for what happened next. But I have a pretty good imagination, and I had my lawyer's reports later, and I had one very awkward phone call with the building manager of the Yorkville condo, who didn't know how to ask me what I wanted him to do. So let me paint you the picture. My son and his wife had a standing reservation Friday nights at a place in Yorkville called Sotto Sotto. Italian. White tablecloths. The kind of restaurant where the bottles of Barolo start at $4, and you pay an extra $40 to have the truffle shaved tableside. They'd been going there once a week for years. The maître d' knew their order before they sat down. That Friday, the bill came. $680 before tip. He handed over the matte black credit card he was so proud of, the one he called his obsidian, and went back to the conversation. Maybe 2 minutes later, the server returned, very politely, and said, "I'm so sorry, sir. The card has been declined. Could we try another?" He laughed. I know that laugh. He's done it since he was 16. It's the laugh of a kid who's never been told no and assumes the universe has made a clerical error. He pulled out a Visa Infinite. He said, "Try this one. The chip on the other one's been finicky." Declined. By now his wife was looking at him, not panicked yet, just confused. He pulled out a third card, a corporate Amex tied to his consulting firm, except that line of credit was also backed by the trust. I'd had my lawyer call that one in too. Declined. The whole table went quiet. They had friends with them, another couple from his consulting world, and the husband, mercifully, picked up the bill. My son made a joke about it being a bank glitch. He laughed too loud. His wife didn't laugh at all. He pulled out his phone and tried to call me. It went straight to a recorded message. The one Bell uses when a number's been blocked. The polite, blank Canadian voice telling him the person he was trying to reach was not available. He tried again. Same voice. He texted. The message turned green. Failed to send. I imagine he sat there in the restaurant for a moment. The way a man sits in a car after he realizes he's just slid through a red light. Stunned. Trying to retrace the last 30 seconds of his life. And then, I imagine his wife leaned across the table and asked him, very quietly, what exactly he had done. The next morning, his Interac e-transfer didn't come through. The $20,000 monthly transfer that landed in their joint account on the 1st of every month. The one that paid the condo fees and the Audi lease and her trainer and his wine club and their cleaner and the dog walker and the food delivery from the place on Yonge that did the keto meals. That money simply did not appear. The account showed the previous balance, $1,146 and change, and that was it. He called the bank. The bank told him they had no record of any pending transfer from the trust. He asked to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor told him the same thing. He tried to call me again. Same voice. He drove out to Forest Hill. I know this because the security company that monitors my gate sent me a notification at 11:47 in the morning. I was in the workshop in the back, the one I built myself in 2014 after I retired, and I had my hearing aids out because I was running the planer. By the time I came inside for lunch, the notification was an hour old, and the camera footage showed his Audi parked at the gate for 38 minutes. He'd pressed the intercom 17 times. He'd called my landline 40-something times. The landline doesn't ring in the workshop. By the time I saw the footage, he was long gone. He left a message on the landline. I listened to it that evening, sitting in the kitchen with a glass of red wine. He sounded, I'll be honest, like a man who had just been told his car was being repossessed, which by Wednesday of the following week, it was. The Audi went first. A flatbed pulled up in front of their building on Davenport on a Tuesday afternoon while she was upstairs on a Pilates call, and by the time she came down to take the dog for a walk, her car was being winched onto the truck. The doorman, who I tip generously every Christmas, watched without expression. She made a scene. She called my son. He couldn't reach me. She called the lease company, who told her the account was past due and the lessor had requested immediate repossession. She didn't even have a Presto card. She'd never been on the TTC in her life, as far as I know. She walked back upstairs in her workout clothes with the dog under her arm, and she sat in her marble kitchen and she cried. I'm not proud of how that detail makes me feel. I'm not proud, but I'm not going to lie to you either. There was a small, hard, old part of me that heard about that moment from the doorman 3 days later and felt something close to peace. The notice on the condo door came the following Monday. 60 days to vacate. The trust, as the lesser of record, was terminating the lease. That's when the calls started in earnest. He bought a burner phone. I know it was a burner because the area code was Mississauga, where he'd grown up but hadn't lived in 20 years, and I didn't recognize the number. The first call I let ring through. He left a message, and his voice had changed. Gone was the man who told me family money was just family money. In his place was someone who sounded scared. He said, Dad, please, I don't know what's happening. The bank is saying things. Please call me back. We can talk this through. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. He called 11 times that day, 23 the next. The third day he called 67 times, between 7 in the morning and 1 in the morning the following day. I know this because my phone keeps a log. I didn't pick up. I didn't listen to the messages until the end of each day, and only the first one, just to take the temperature. He tried different angles. He tried the apology. He tried the medical concern, calling to ask if I was all right, if I was being taken advantage of by someone, if my mind was slipping. That one made me laugh out loud, alone in my kitchen, because if my mind was slipping, his life would have been a lot more comfortable that week. He tried the rage. He tried the guilt. He tried, on day 5, putting his wife on the phone, and she gave a tearful performance about how much she loved me, how I was the father she'd never had, how her own dad had walked out on her family in Hamilton when she was 9, and I had been everything to her ever since. I had heard the speech before. It was the speech she gave at our wedding rehearsal dinner. She hadn't changed a word. By day 12, I had a tally. 247 calls. I wrote it down on a Post-it and stuck it to the fridge, next to the grocery list. In the meantime, my lawyer and I had been working. I'd had time to think about what I wanted to do with the trust. My wife and I had met in 1972 in our second year at McMaster. She'd been studying social work. She'd grown up in a small town near Sudbury, the daughter of a nickel miner and a school teacher, and she'd gotten to McMaster on the strength of a scholarship and her own stubbornness. She used to tell me, near the end, that she wished we'd done more for kids who came from where she came from. We'd been generous over the years, but in the way wealthy people are generous. A check to the United Way at Christmas. A donation to the hospital wing where she'd been treated. Tickets to the gala. Nothing that took skin off our backs. I told my lawyer I wanted to set up a foundation. I wanted it to fund full-ride scholarships for students from Northern Ontario, from places like the one my wife grew up in. Kids whose parents worked the mines or the mills or the bush, who wanted to study engineering or skilled trades. I wanted it named after her. I wanted the first scholarship awarded the following September. He asked me how much of the trust I wanted to direct toward it. I told him, all of it. Every dollar that wasn't earmarked for my own care for the rest of my life. $32 million, give or take. Liquidate the cottage. Sell the condo in Yorkville once the lease ran out. Sell the second car. Put the house in Forest Hill into the foundation as a future asset, to be sold upon my death. Pour every cent of it into the foundation and let it grow. He looked at me over his reading glasses. He said, "You understand what this means." I said, "I do." He said, "He'll come back at you. Legally. You should be prepared for that." I told him I'd been preparing for that since the morning I drove down to his office in the snow. We sent the letter on a Wednesday. It came from his firm, on his firm's letterhead, formal as a wedding invitation. It informed my son and his wife that the grantor of the trust had elected to remove them as beneficiaries, that this decision was final and not subject to negotiation, and that the grantor had instructed his counsel to invite them to a meeting at the firm's offices the following Monday at 10 o'clock for the purpose of reviewing the final disposition of trust assets, should they wish to attend. I knew what they would think. They would think the wall was cracking. They would think that all those calls had finally worn me down and I was inviting them in to negotiate. They would put on their good clothes and they would prepare their speeches, and they would arrive on time, full of contrition they did not feel, ready to be reinstated. They were on time. He wore a suit I'd bought him for his 30th birthday. She wore a navy dress and her grandmother's pearls, which was a nice touch, very heritage, very respectable daughter-in-law. They sat across the table from me in the conference room, and I watched my son try to read my face and fail. He hadn't seen me in 5 weeks. I think he'd forgotten what I actually looked like, separate from the role he'd cast me in. He started. He had clearly rehearsed. He talked about misunderstandings, about stress, about the pressure of running his firm, about how his wife had been struggling with anxiety, about how the text message had been sent in a moment that did not represent who they really were. He used the word family 14 times in the first 3 minutes. I counted. He talked about how much they loved me. He talked about how the last few weeks had been a wake-up call, how they realized now what really mattered, how he wanted to start coming up to Forest Hill for Sunday dinners, how she'd been thinking about how to bring me into her brand somehow, as a kind of mentor figure. The wise patriarch. I let him talk. I let him use up everything he brought with him. When he finally ran out of road, he sat back and waited for me to respond. I slid a folder across the table. I said, "Thank you for coming today. I want to make sure you understand what's about to happen, because I don't want there to be any confusion afterward. This document is the amended trust. My lawyer and I executed it 3 weeks ago." He opened the folder. His wife leaned over to read along. I said, "You will see, on page 4, that you have both been removed as beneficiaries. The condo lease in Yorkville will not be renewed. The vehicle leases have been terminated. The credit lines have been closed. The monthly transfer was discontinued, as you've noticed, on the 1st of last month." He nodded slowly. He was waiting for the second half. The part where I told him what he needed to do to get it back. I said, "On page 7, you will see the new primary beneficiary. The trust has been restructured to fund a charitable foundation in your mother's name. The foundation will award full-ride scholarships beginning next September to students from Northern Ontario pursuing engineering and trades degrees at Canadian universities." His face changed. I watched it happen. The hope drained out of it like water out of a sink. I said, "The first cohort of scholarship recipients will include a young woman from a small town near Sudbury, the same town your mother grew up in. She is the first in her family to attend university. She'll be studying mechanical engineering at the University of Toronto, the same program you were enrolled in for 3 semesters before you decided it wasn't for you." His wife made a sound. "I won't describe it." I said, "Your mother and I had a long conversation, the summer before she got sick, about the kind of legacy we wanted to leave. We didn't finish that conversation in time. I'm finishing it now." He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was very quiet. He said, "Dad, we are your family." I said, "Yes, you are. That hasn't changed. Nothing in this document changes that. It just changes what comes attached to it." He said, "So that's it. That's everything. You're just cutting us off." I said, "I'm not cutting you off. I'm cutting off the money. Those are 2 different things, and you've been confused about the difference for a long time. You and I, we can have dinner. We can talk. We can rebuild something if you want to. But it will not be built on a transfer on the 1st of every month. It will be built on whatever you actually want from me. Separate from that." He stared at the table. His wife was already gathering her purse. I think she understood faster than he did. Some women do. He said, "You're going to die one day." I said, "That's true." He said, "And then what?" I said, "Then the foundation will continue. You won't be in the will." Your mother and I talked about that too. He stood up. He didn't say goodbye. He walked out of the conference room with his wife behind him. And I sat there in the quiet for a moment with my lawyer. And my lawyer, who has known me for 34 years, reached across the table and squeezed my forearm once. the way men do when there are no words for it. I drove home to the city, and the snow was coming down in those big, slow flakes that make Toronto look like the cover of a book. 6 months later, I stood on a stage at the University of Toronto in a rented gown and gave a short speech to the inaugural cohort of scholarship recipients. There were 11 of them. The young woman from the town near Sudbury sat in the front row next to her mother, who had taken the bus down from Copriol that morning and was wearing the kind of dress people wear to a wedding when they've never been to a wedding at a place like that before. I told them about my wife. I told them about the nickel mine. I told them she would have been so proud of them she would have cried, and that I was crying instead on her behalf, which got a laugh. I heard about my son through other people, the way you hear about distant relatives. The condo had been sold. He and his wife had moved to a rented 2-bedroom in Leslieville. He had taken a job at a logistics firm in Scarborough, doing something with supply chain analytics. She had closed the lifestyle brand. She was, last I heard, working part-time at a boutique on Queen West and doing some freelance social media consulting on the side. They were not, as far as I could tell, divorced. There's a part of me that's glad about that. Whatever else happened, they had to climb out of it together. The dog had to be rehomed. I won't pretend that didn't bother me. I didn't hear from him for almost a year. Then, on a Thursday evening in early October, sitting in the same sunroom where I'd sat the day of the text, I got a message. A new number. Ontario area code. I almost deleted it before I read it. 3 words and a question mark. Dad, can we talk? No demands. No preamble. No reference to the trust, or the foundation, or the year of silence. Just the question. I sat with it for a long time. I made myself a coffee, the dark roast with the cinnamon. I watched the light come down on the maples, which had gone gold and red and brown again. The way they do every year, whether anyone is watching or not. I picked up the phone. I started to type a reply. I deleted it. I started again. I deleted it again. In the end, I set the phone face down on the table beside me, and I leaned back in the chair, and I let myself sit with the question for a while. The thing about a question like that is, it doesn't expire. It can wait. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It hadn't been for months. It was just the silence of a man alone in his own kitchen, on his own time, deciding for himself when to answer. That was the gift in the end. Not the foundation, though I'm proud of the foundation. Not the trust, though I'm at peace with what we did. The gift was that. The deciding. The silence that belonged to me and not to anyone else. If you've made it this far, thank you. Tell me in the comments. If you'd been in my chair, with that text on your phone and that little red heart underneath it, what would you have done? I've been turning it over in my head for going on 2 years now, and I'm not always sure I got it right. But I'm sure I got it more right than I would have if I'd answered him that same evening. The way the old me would have. The way the man with the suitcase still in his hand would have. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do for a grown child is to finally, at long last, give them exactly what they asked for, and then to wait, in their own kitchen, in their own quiet, and see who shows up on the other side of it. I've had a long time to sit with what happened, and I want to be careful here, because the last thing a man my age should do is dress up a private mess as wisdom. But I think there are a few things worth saying out loud, in case anyone listening is sitting where I sat that afternoon in the sunroom, holding a phone that's just turned cold in their hand. The first thing is that none of this was an accident. I have to own that. Connor didn't wake up one morning a stranger to me. He was built, slowly, transfer by transfer, year by year, by a father who confused generosity with love. Every time I wrote a check without a conversation, every time I covered a credit card balance without asking what was on it, every time I let the Muskoka cottage become a thing he expected instead of a thing he was grateful for, I was teaching him a lesson I didn't mean to teach. That money is weather. That it just shows up, like the snow in November, whether you've earned it or not. Brianna learned the same lesson by marriage. The two of them weren't villains. They were graduates of a school I'd been running, free of charge for 35 years. That's the cause and effect part of it, and is the part I have to keep at the front of my mind, because it keeps me from feeling righteous about any of this. The second thing is about character. My wife used to say that you raise a child in 3 rooms: the room where you teach them right from wrong, the room where you teach them how to think, and the room where you teach them how to keep going when it's hard. Decency, sense, and grit. She said most parents only build one of those rooms, and it's usually the wrong one. I built the first one well enough in my own way. I taught Connor not to lie, not to steal, not to be cruel for sport. But I never built him the other 2. I never made him sit with a hard problem until he solved it himself. I never let him fail at something small enough to recover from. By the time the Audi got winched onto that flatbed, he was 41 years old and meeting his first real consequence. That's on me as much as it's on him. The third thing, and the one I want anyone listening to take with them, is that love and money are not the same currency. And the moment you let yourself believe they are, you've already lost the person you're trying to hold on to. I gave Connor everything I had except the one thing he actually needed, which was the chance to find out who he was without me underwriting the answer. The foundation in my wife's name will outlive me. Connor, last I heard, is still working in Scarborough and still married, which is more than I'd have bet on a year ago. The text on my phone, the one that just says "Dad" in a question mark, is still unanswered. I'll get there. Probably soon, but on my own time, in my own kitchen with my own coffee in my hand, which, when I think about it, is the only inheritance worth anything in the end.